Welcome to the Not Your Mama's Autism podcast, a podcast about being unapologetically human through the eyes of both neurodivergent people and the community that supports them. I'm Lolanana Og. We're happy to announce in our new season, Season 7, that we have joined the Alive Podcast Network, further amplifying our advocacy by storytelling journey. At the time this episode airs, we'll be at the start of the back to school season. In our household, that looked like an 8th grader and a 5th grader starting their new school year. For my son, he's had some practice in this life phase. This is now his 3rd year of middle school. He's quite active in various activities, including National Junior Honor Society and Student Council. For my daughter, though, it'll be more of a transition for her. Since March 2023, my daughter has been attending full-time speech, OT, PT, and ABA at a nearby pediatric clinic. So no school for her. So previously she would have more of a mix of school and private therapy, which has really been what she's been used to for the majority of her elementary school journey. Now, the reason behind why we made this transition is probably worthy of its own episode one day, so I'll kind of put a pin in that. But we did do that for a while, and we're now reintroducing her back into school. But if she had stayed in school this entire time, she actually would have been a 6th grader, not a 5th grader. But since she was out for a period of time, we wanted to reintroduce her to a setting that was more familiar with her to maximize her success. We chose to have her attend elementary school instead of going straight to middle school. For those of you who are new to this podcast, I'm an attorney, I'm an advocate, a wife, a lifetime caregiver. My brother, son, and daughter are all on the autism spectrum. My brother and my daughter are both intellectually disabled and autistic. My brother is non-speaking and my daughter is minimally speaking. My son is what educators would call twice exceptional, gifted, and autistic. We've needed to navigate the education system in very intentional ways to maximize its benefits for both kids based on their differing needs. We consider educators as essential members of our village, that we need them to help us raise our children, and hopefully what will become the best versions of themselves. Not what society expects of them, but based on their God-given talents and abilities. In this episode, you'll hear from a professor of special education and an innovator, Dr. Kim Floyd. And we will talk about her evolution in the education space, including her role in standing up a center focused on assistive technologies with people with disabilities in mind. So, with that in mind, let's get started. Dr. Kim Floyd, educator, innovator, mom, all around amazing human. Welcome to the Not Your Mama's Autism podcast.
Excited to be.
So I know you're Dr. Floyd to some, you're Kim to me. We met a couple years ago now, and since there's just some people in life when you meet, you're like, okay, this is good people. This is good people. We're gonna connect.
Yep. You find your people pretty quickly and easily.
You do. You are a professor at West Virginia University, among many other things, in special education. You also have a rich background in psychology and trauma-informed practices, I should say, and special education, amongst other things, assistive tech. And I hope to get into all those things during the course of this conversation. But what first sparked you to want to study special education in the first place?
Always neat. And first, just it's an honor to be here with you. Just being in your presence just kind of grounds me. I just enjoy talking to you whenever I can. Um, and in thinking about what brought me to special education, it's going to actually sound terrible in some ways because I always wanted to be a child psychiatrist or psychologist, which that was my ultimate goal of what I wanted to do. And when I was at East Carolina University, that's what I was studying, and there was a work study position, and it was at a developmental day center, and it was working with young kids, and I knew that I wanted to work with young kids. And so I went and applied and met with them, and it was the day that the kids were not in the program. And I think the next week I went back, and the kids were there, and they were all these kids with disabilities. And I just was thrown back. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, I do not feel comfortable at all. But I was like, it was going to be just a job to get me through that semester, and then I'd look for something more aligned with what I was thinking that I wanted to do. And I tell you, Lola, after a week, I was like, this is, like you said, like I just knew this is what I wanted to do. This is where I wanted to be. And I switched my major the next semester and went to graduate school in special education, and I haven't looked back since.
When you know, you know. When
When
you
you know,
know,
you
you
know.
know.
Mhm.
Yeah. So your educational background, I mentioned at the start, is this rich mix of psychology and understanding trauma and education. What led you to develop this multidisciplinary approach over time?
Some life events happened, and so when I was the developmental day program works with early childhood. So it was a program that served mainly 3 to 5 year old students. At that time, we could serve kids that were up to 8 years, about 8 years old. But most of the time, we were there until they transitioned to kindergarten. And if there wasn't really a good fit for them in the kindergarten home, we would keep them an extra year. That happened very rarely. But when I started, the program only served kids with disabilities. There was no inclusion, there was no mainstream, like those terms were not even really a part of the vernacular at that point. And
Mhm.
slowly over time, we had an amazing director. I was a graduate assistant, then I was the lead teacher. And my director, he was an amazing man, Dr. Jim Taylor. He's done a lot for children with and families across the board, but has started a really neat program in nature, working with families, getting them in nature in North Carolina, families with children with autism. And he realized early on that we needed to do more as a university program to really represent what society needed to be doing. And so um, we would have one of our students go to the child care center that was at the university, but we had to send a developmental aide with him, and he was maybe there 1 or 2 hours. And then it gradually morphed into we would take 3 or 4 kids to the center on campus, and we would take 3 or 4 staff, and we just saw the benefits. It was just an amazing just natural environment for all the kids. We didn't have to sometimes think, why are you always with Johnny? Like, why are you always beside him? And it's, well, I'm Johnny's teacher. Well, can't he just play with me? Just very clearly, like, we don't really need you here. Like, we've got this whole playing together down pat. Like, you just go and do teacher stuff and let us do the kids stuff. And so as I moved into the director's position, we were able to transition to where there was a 1-to-1 ratio. So it was 50-50 students with disabilities and kids that were typically developing. And it was pretty powerful. And as a classroom teacher, of course, I thought I was wonderful. I thought I was a great teacher. And then I had my first son. And you can attest to this. When you become a parent, you realize all those things you said you'd never do, and you couldn't believe how, oh my goodness, they sent their child to school in their pajamas. What do just these crazy expectations. Like, that's out the window. And now I'm lucky I come to work every day, not in my pajamas, right? So
Yeah.
that exactly, and so then that changed me. And then and what I wanted in how what I really saw the benefit from, because I think at first I really thought it was the students that had disabilities, that they were the ones that were really benefiting from inclusion. And again, this is like 35 years ago. Um, and then I got to see, like with my own son, how powerful it was for him and what a difference it made for him. And then fast forward, 18 months, and I had a child that had a disability. He was identified on the autism spectrum around 15 months. And so when you have, and you can attest, when you have a child that's nonverbal, you become a very different parent. But I also realize now, like, what journey those parents went through, that before I learned how powerful, I thought I knew, but you don't know until you experience it in a different way. And so, hearing your child's voice and having them say, I love you, or, telling you what they want or they need. I mean, it's just so powerful. And so, I think that it led me to, with my one son, to really look into assistive technology, because he was nonverbal at the time, and assistive technology was just really coming out, like the picture exchange communication
Yep.
system and other communication devices was really kind of really developing. I mean, when I started, we had one computer and it had a floppy disk. I mean, that tells you how long ago. And now the technology can do nearly anything. Um, but what a power it did, giving kids voice, giving them a voice, giving them a way to interact with each other, giving them empowered to say and their wants and their needs versus us interpreting what they wanted or what they didn't want. And so that was really very powerful. And so that kind of, I still had the desire to be in special education and to work with that population. I think with Colby, then I started to really shift and see the power of assistive technology. And that's really, sparked my interest in that area. And then fast forward many years with my older son, a pretty traumatic event happened in his life, and it shifted everything all over again in terms of the power of trauma and resiliency, and the power that school plays in that as well, because there are many things that need to happen in schools. We don't know who, you don't always know who has experienced trauma, who's living in trauma. But through COVID, if nothing else, through that pandemic, I think people are more and more aware of just the mental health challenges that children face. And they're in our classrooms every day. And we need to create environments that are safe where kids can learn. And that's where, the trauma-informed practices really kind of has taken a forefront with me right now. Still doing all the things with assistive technology and rural special education, but really trying to infuse as much mental health, child advocacy, self-advocacy into what I do in a daily life and into the courses I teach.
Can you give us some examples of how you're incorporating these more with this trauma-informed practices mindset? How are you incorporating it more into the higher education classroom?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in the classroom itself, I was fortunate enough, we have an honors college here at WVU. And so I proposed a course. It was shortly after things happened with Casey, where I wanted to look at trauma, resiliency, and children. So I was able to develop that. Sorry, I'm going to cut my phone off because I didn't do that before, because no one ever calls me, but everybody will call me now.
Of course, that's how it works.
So so the class is solely devoted to dealing with different types of trauma, doing trauma-informed practices in schools and community settings, into whatever environment that they are going into. I infuse it into other courses that I'm teaching, just as a some places it's kind of almost like to wet their whistle and say, look, we know these kids are out there and we know we need to serve them, and they're not going to be able to self-identify all the time, nor would they probably want to self-identify. So let's create an environment to where they don't have to, and they can just thrive and be successful. And so when I go and do observations or when I work on grants or other projects with colleagues, that's really my focus of how you just shift that and how you start with that mindset of creating that safe environment and what that might look like. And then some of the grants we just received a grant, it's in our second year, but it was to put more mental health professionals into one of the rural schools here in one of these in the rural county here in West Virginia. And that's been an amazing opportunity. And to see, what they're doing and as counselors, what they're doing to work with the teachers that ultimately influence, the classroom and the students that they serve. And even though, you feel like they're prepared, they said it smacks them in the face when they go, like just the poverty that's in schools and just the kids, the amount of trauma that these kids are experiencing and coming to school with is, it's pretty rough.
You mentioned rural special education a couple of times. Your focus, your specialization is there. Obviously, the type of education that you focus on is in demand everywhere. But your focus is on rural population. How did this come about, and why do you believe the focus on this particular segment of the community in America is needed?
So West Virginia University is a land grant university. And so when I first started here, I came from North Carolina, and it seemed rural in some ways. It's not there's no rurality like what I've seen in West Virginia. I know there are in other parts of the country, but for me it was a culture shock when I arrived here in Morgantown. And my department chair at the time, Dr. Barbara Ludlow, who's a very prominent, prolific figure in special education, she was a part of this organization, the American Council on Rural Special Education, which Lola is very familiar with since she was our keynote speaker, and she won a special award from them last year, which was wonderful. But she was very, very involved. And I started learning through her, and then even more so now with my involvement with the organization, the unique challenges, but also the amazing strengths that come from rural communities, and recognizing that there's not a one size fits all. And rural communities, there's things, as I said, that are amazing and wonderful, but they also need different kinds of supports. And so looking at it logistically and, through a lens of what do they need and how can we build on the strength that they have, when the pandemic happened, it was, there was this immediate shift to online education. Well, we're in communities that don't have, internet access. So how does that happen? They don't have the infrastructure. So how does that happen? How do we make change in that regard? We look at the health of children, and some of the rural communities, they may be an hour and a half away from like a fresh market where they can get fresh fruit and vegetables. And so looking at those sorts of things, you think, oh, wow, like rural communities, there's just challenge after challenge after challenge. And you forget the strength that comes within those rural communities, that there's a strong sense of community, and there's a strong sense of pride in a lot of rural communities. They're very tight knit, and oftentimes, generations have grown up together, and there's this sense of support that they feel within the community. And the school is often the hub of those communities. That's where, families come together. That's where, a lot of trainings happens or a lot of supports happen. And so, what I've seen in working with rural communities, if you start at the school, you're going to touch a large portion of that community, because they're going to get the information out to other people within the community, because in some way or another, they're going to know someone that might need this information, or they're going to have, a grandparent who lives next door to somebody's cousin who they know, oh, wow, that they need resources on assistive technology, or there was, a traumatic event in their life, where are some resources within that community. And so that's been very eye-opening for me, is to see how well these communities band together that often are often underfunded, have a lot less resources than larger communities. And there was I was on a call. They were talking about this group of teachers through the teacher education division of the Council for Exceptional Children, and they were going to go speak to legislation. And so there was a school, I think she was in Texas, she might have been from Oklahoma, that was on the call. And she was saying, they'd love to get teachers' pay like increased because they lose teachers. There's such a turnover of special education teachers. There's such a high turnover in rural communities. But the building's falling down, like ceilings are actually falling down. And the person said, well, which would you rather have, like higher salaries or like a structurally sound building? And someone said, why do you have to choose? What other,
Wow.
what other environment and group of people would you make that statement to them? And I thought that was just pretty telling, like how that's the legitimacy of what some rural community and schools are facing.
You are integral to the American Council of Rural Special Education. You mentioned, yes, I delivered a keynote last year, and thank you for the opportunity. It was amazing. It just shows how there are very unique needs to the rural community, but also some serious universal themes. It's just this mix of these two, which is basically where this podcast lives, because the universal themes can be felt through multiple different communities. But when I was at that conference last year, and you just felt the sense of community in the room, you felt all these folks like willing to, you could tell, roll up their sleeves. And could you talk a little bit through about that origin story, how this coalition of Avengers, if you will, assembled?
We've got a board meeting next week. I'll tell them that they're coalition of Avengers. They will love that. They'll order capes. Um, I'm glad that was your experience, because that's certainly been my experience once I became involved with the organization. And it's not that old. It was formed in the early '80s, and it was just a grassroots effort of people faculty across the country that recognized the unique challenges within the rural community and in rural special ed in particularly. And so it started from a group of people coming together with that common goal and that sense of, there are unique things that we need to be teaching and educating our students about. And we need to get them to buy into all of this about how powerful these communities are. And there is that sense of, all for one when you go in to, whether it's a meeting at Acres, or if you go to one of the presentations, or you have a wonderful keynote speaker, there's just the sense of like, yeah, I needed to hear this. This is my tribe of people, and this is what I needed to hear. And it's really evolved over the years. Like now, I think in the beginning, there was more of an outreach, just trying to get the word out about rural special education and the need for, training this unique set of teachers for the environments that they're going to go into, so that they'll want to stay, rather than them getting a teaching license and getting a job in a rural community and like, oh gosh, I didn't know it was going to be like this. Let me leave as soon as I can. But really just the power of being in a rural classroom, being in a classroom in a rural setting. You see pretty quickly just the power dynamics that come along. The main goals of the organization are to obviously enhance the skill of the early educator, but also working with related services. We don't have as many families that are part of the organization, and that's kind of been across time. That's something that we've probably need to be more purposeful about. Right now, it's a mix of a lot of higher education faculty, doctoral students, master's students, and now we have actually undergraduate students that are coming to the conference. And so we want to be able to disseminate best practices for effective instruction for rural special education, because there are some things that are different between rural and urban areas. I mean, we just know that to be true. So let's go ahead and teach, teach that right away and get that to the forefront. We also want to be have a voice in policy and in legislation that's ultimately going to govern the supports and this, the education that occurs within those rural communities. So it is a really unique experience. I mean, we're a pretty small organization still. I think our conferences, we have between 150 or 200, depending on the city. We rotate East Coast, West Coast. But I've never been in a place that's been more welcoming, and you can talk about a topic and you'll see as soon as the session ends, there's people in the hallway kind of talking about it and like, oh, well, have you thought about this? Or let's do this together. Or let's do, what about this research? Or, could you come and talk to my class? Or we need professional development on youth mental health. How do we do that? So, I mean, it's just an amazing group of people that are very like-minded and just overall very kind people. I mean, really, the money that the organization has, we give out in scholarships and awards, trying to get teachers, further training and get students off on the right track. So I'm glad that was your experience too. I'm a little biased, I know. I really just love ACRE, the American Council on Rural Special Education, and my son Casey loves it. Like he came with me when we were in Alexandria. It was 2 years before COVID, I believe, and he's come now. He's just a fixture there and helps at every conference. I don't know what we're going to do when he graduates, but he was also very instrumental in creating that in a social justice award that recognizes people that do great work for individuals with disabilities and advocate for the underserved and often those without voices. And for those that you don't know, Lolo won that award last year. So that was a huge honor to be able to give that to her, because she certainly deserved it and continues the fight. And this year we're going to be at Virginia Beach. So if you want to come to the sunshine, we'll be in Virginia.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And just this social justice award is in your name, in your honor, in Casey's honor, and it's really clear why. It's really clear why. You've taken innovation and education to new spaces, to places where people who have been historically unseen, which we have very similar themes in our advocacy work because we are all about the unseen. So with that in mind, in addition to ACRES, you developed and you're still very actively involved in, I believe the acronym is CATE, Center for Collaborative Assistive Technology Education Lab.
Yes.
Can you tell us some of the exciting new projects coming out of this lab?
Yes, I would. It's something that again, I guess I feel like I have two little babies in play right now, and they each devote a different amount of time and energy. So Acres, that's one. I feel like that's one half of who I am, and then the other part, the Assistive Technology Lab that we have here, it's housed in our College of Applied Human Sciences, but for those that don't know, we've gone through a little financial hiccup at West Virginia University. So we weren't sure that the space was going to be available anymore. And so we really had to try to pivot to do as much as we could online, which we kind of had a head start with COVID because the students were not able to come into the lab. So when I started at WVU, the lab, that was part of my first year startup, was to develop the lab. And I think so the students will come in from different disciplines and different courses, and they can complete a competency-based activity within the lab just to familiarize themselves with what's available. And mainly I want them to see that it's not that hard to use. And it's really not that hard to implement. You just kind of have to think that way, and think about, oftentimes, if you didn't have a way to communicate, if you didn't have a way to demonstrate how much it is that you know, um, what would you, what do you need? Like, what would be that space? And then also, how would it affect your self-esteem if you, as you said, like those without a voice, like how would you feel if that's how you went your entire day and had decisions made for you all day? And that may be decisions you want, they may be decisions you don't. And so that first semester, oh, it is. I mean, it is. I mean, as a mom, there's very seldom that your choice is the priority. So, imagine if you're in a classroom with other people same size they're getting whatever it is that they want, and you're not even able to communicate what it is that you want. Or you have an adult who tells somebody what it is they think that you want, and it is not even close to what it is that you want. So that was really the premise, was to show them just the variety that's out there and how easy it is to be able to implement different devices and different interventions. And the first semester, I think we had 4 classes that used the lab, and we had maybe 500 assignments that were complete. I think it was 512 that for the whole year. Last semester, we had over 2,000 assignments completed in the lab. I mean, so it has grown tremendously. And people from, counseling, early childhood special ed, child development, family studies, the gifted, some, and just general special education, some master's programs. I mean, and the goal is to expand it. Right now, I think we just were kind of on a reprieve last year because we weren't even sure if we'd still have the space, because now WVU is going on a different model, but we do have the space. And so the goal right now is to expand to other courses across campus, and not just within our college, and then seek funding. We have some Oculus now, and we have a 3D printer. And so just showing, okay, people may not think that's assistive technology, but how can we use that? So like the 3D printer, everybody walks in and thinks it's really cool. Oh, I want to, the first time I think everybody wanted to do a Pokemon ball. I'm not even sure really what Pokemon is exactly, but they did. And so okay, so then how do we transition that to where it is meaningful in an education or community setting? So when you're making adaptive books, sometimes you have to put, they, like maybe you wanted them to count something in the adaptive book, and so they could make, like, let's say, little frogs or even little Pokemon balls, and so they make a story, and then they create the characters within the story, and use 3D objects printed very small, and you can make books out of that. Kids, sometimes the kids make fidgets. Just they think about how they would use it in their classes, and how in the math department, they when they came, they were making like the block 10, that some schools don't have those resources, so you can just make it with a 3D printer. And then the Oculus is just such a great experience because it's just an immersive environment, and oftentimes kids think they're just playing a game, and forget that the power that's in there, that social aspect that can happen. Sometimes with the movement, you can have kids that might be, let's say, that are not as ambulatory, that can interact and play, tennis now, because they can play with Oculus, or, another form of device, or something that we might have in the lab. So we have it really from early childhood up until mainly K-12, but we do have some people from the community that will come in at times just saying, okay, I just need to brainstorm some ideas and think through some stuff. And so it's exciting now because we know we have it. So now we can start looking for some funding for new devices and some new trainings and things like that.
How do you think assistive tech can help level the playing field when it comes to high quality education delivery and therapy as well within schools?
Yeah, so I think assistive technology, in a lot of ways, it does level the playing field, so to speak. I think looking at universal design for learning. Are you familiar with? Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I knew you would be. So, uh, so I kind of pair those two things together, and when you give kids, so the premise of universal design for learning, one aspect is that it helps kids be able to express themselves. So how can you really gauge what a student knows or what they don't know if they don't have a way to communicate that with you? And so if you do like a simple um, assistive technology assessment, and you look at, okay, what does a child, and my son actually went through this, so I'll use Colby as an example. So he was given a prompt of what would you do at a birthday party, and given a pen and paper, or pencil and paper. And so he wrote it down, and he maybe wrote 2 sentences. Not legible. You couldn't really tell what it was that he wrote. Then he was given the keyboard, same prompt, type, or similar prompt, and type what you know. And maybe 2 or 3 sentences again. You could tell he knows enough to know if there's a line under it, it's not spelled correctly. And so he had the mindset, if he saw a lot of those things with lines under it, he just stopped because he knew he wasn't spelling things correctly. Then it was, okay, let's just say, let's do the voice to text, and a similar prompt. It was 4 paragraphs, 2 pages. And so you could get the depth of what it is that he understood. And so that was one of the technologies that it was an amazing technology. It's changed since then, but Read Write Gold was an amazing text to speech and speech to text, just amazing thumb. He just, now it's all on the web, but it was just a thumb drive, and he would put it into his computer, and the teachers were like, "Oh wow, I didn't realize he knew all of that stuff." And it was, how many kids don't know, have a parent who's in that field? And it took me, even though they knew I was in the field, and I'm in the field and this is what I do, it took me until he was in 3rd or 4th grade to really get him the technology package that really demonstrated what he knew. I mean, he was a non-reader until he was in 4th grade, and we had done different therapies, and we'd done the technology, and so he was a non-reader. We went to Pittsburgh, and they had this ocular motor vision therapy, which was something that was new to me, and they incorporated a whole bunch of really neat things that I try also to do in the lab. He went from a non-reader to above grade level in 1 year, when all that support, the right supports, were all the way around him. And not that that's typical for everybody. It's not going to be typical for everybody, but when it's your one, that it makes a difference
Shows
in.
what's possible.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
And
it shows
and
what's
so
possible, and
yeah.
that's really powerful.
Oh, it was. And and it was funny, on a side note, he won the Council for Exceptional Children's has a great award. It's called the Yes I Can Award, and it's a national award. And kids that make they make progress in academics. It could be social. It could be advocacy. I mean, there's different strands. Well, so his teachers nominated him for the national award, and he won. And so he got to go to Philadelphia. And on the slip, I was reading it to him, and it says, that he gets, I think they called it a statue. And he's like, "Mom, I not want the statue." And I was like, "You don't want the award?" He goes, "I don't want to stand a long time for them to make a statue of me." And I was like, "Kobe, you're going to get this award. They're going to give you the award." And it's just, he didn't want to stand long enough
I
for them.
love it. I love it.
And
I love it. I
yeah.
love it. I love it.
So like, getting back to see, I knew we'd get on a tangent, but or that I would jump off on a tangent, and it was funny. Colby said, "Well, how long are you going to talk to Miss Lola tonight?" And so I said, I think about an hour or so. He goes, "Oh, I hope she keeps you on target." I said, "Thanks, Colby. She does as much as I do." So,
I love that about kids.
he's the truth in my
Your
house.
kids, no matter how, yeah, there's always one that just grounds you. Like
Yep.
there's nothing you can do after that. Like my son one day told me, he goes, "Mom, fella one day said, Mom, I love you. You're compassionate, but sometimes you can be a little extra." And I was like, you know what? That I get it. I get it. I agree with you. I agree with you.
You're just gonna
I
own
think your dad would agree with you too. Sometimes you just gotta, oh, exactly. You are who you are. You are who you are.
husband. I can see him shaking his head right along with him. So yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Yep, yep, uh, yep. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, yes. That's true. You did meet him at the award ceremony. That's true. You did meet him. So yes, yes, yes. So now you have that picture of him just looking at me like, yeah, this woman has come again. Yep, that pretty much sums us up. That sums us up.
Yep. So, like, so it was
Yep, yep,
important,
yep.
like, for the kids to be able to demonstrate what they know and what they don't know. But then also, assistive technology allows us to be able to present things in a way that they understand. And so that goes into the multiple means of representation with UDL. So it, will, maybe you need something. Some kids do fine with the textbook. Maybe some need to have it read to them. Maybe some do better if they have a video. Some do better if they are hands-on. There's all different ways that kids learn. And so why not just set it up to where all those options are available? I do that in my college classes. Like, for every topic, there's obviously readings, then there's, a video, then I do a narrated part, just because one of those is going to reinforce
That's
something that maybe
awesome.
they didn't quite get through, one way or another. So, that's just the power that's there. And it does and teachers are like, well, I just don't have time for that. I just, and not all teachers, but some teachers are like, I just don't have time to do that. But then, do you have the time when the child gets behind to catch them back up? Like, why not just start it off from the
Mm.
very beginning? And that's the same thing like with the trauma informed practice. Set your classroom up the way that every kid can be successful. Because I promise you, if you don't, those kids are going to let you know through behaviors, actions, words, what they're going to let you know one way or another, and you're going to spend that time. So, do you want to do it in the beginning so everybody can be successful and let's just pull each other along and go through this together? Or do we want two or three or four or more kids to struggle and then stand out as being different and then retrofit the environment? Because you're going to have to do it one way or another.
So, how do you think assistive tech can help level this playing field when it comes to the delivery of high quality education?
So I think looking at it from what constitutes the learning process, information has got to get in. We've got to get information into in ways that children can understand. And so that includes, sometimes it's the written text, sometimes it's just verbal discussion, sometimes it's a digital storybook versus a traditional storybook, or maybe it's doing web reviews, or maybe watching a movie. There's all different ways, along with just the traditional hands-on kind of learning. It's moved way past the paper and pencil. There's lots of ways that kids can get information now. And so just finding that way that really connects with students. And I think I mentioned, I do that with my college students because my goal is for them to get the depth of information as much as they can, not just get the surface knowledge, but go as deeply as they want or as they can. And so I present everything I do in, there's obviously journal readings or a textbook, online resources, and then I narrate a PowerPoint. And oftentimes there's something that I have them do with all of that that's a unique experience for them. Um, so getting that information into them in a variety of ways that they don't have to pick, and they don't have to choose just one way that I think works best. They can pick the way that works best for them. Young kids don't always know that right up front, so you've got to present it in a variety of ways. Um, and then also, part of that learning process is, then once we get the information in, how can they demonstrate to us what it is that they know? And equally important, what it is that they don't know, so that we can look back at our teaching and not be thin skinned and figure out within our own teaching, like, what was I lacking? What was I missing? What did I need to do in a different way that made sense to the students? And so, even in my classes, like, they have, for every assignment, they have two choices. They can present it in like or several choices, but one might be a traditional paper pencil, one might be making a PowerPoint, one might be narrating something, or creating their own podcast. So there's different ways that they can demonstrate what it is that they know. And that's really important, I think, for us to give kids a variety of ways that they feel comfortable with to share what it is that they know. Because that's a huge point of pride for people, to be able to learn something and then to be able to share it back, and the biggest thing, it comes to my mind, like with my youngest son. He had an IEP where the test was supposed to be read to him. That was the only thing that teacher did, was paper and pencil test. That's all she did. And he was in first grade or second grade. And it was just paper and pencil, because that's what the school did. And we studied and studied and studied, and he knew everything. It was third grade, sorry. He was older, because it was more paper pencil in third grade. And failed it. I think he got one right. And I said, "What happened?" And he goes, "Did not read the answers to me." I was like, what do you, they didn't read the questions, honey? Was something confusing? Like, what did it? And that teacher, because the IEP said that his test would be read to him, she only read the test questions. She said that reading the test answers was not on his IEP. So she would not read his IEP, the answers out loud. So to me, as a teacher, as a parent, is very different. But as a teacher, even if the IEP said I didn't need to do that, I would automatically have done it. If they, and when I met with her, I was like, he didn't just choose to only be able to not read questions. Like, he also can't read the answers. Like, he doesn't magically.
So they read the call of the question, but not the questions needed to answer the multiple choice.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And that was a battle to be able to get that changed for him. And it's so some things seem that common sense, but then I also respect teachers. I mean, there's at times that they're so bound by it's a litigious society right now. And so they're bound by these documents. And sometimes I think they're so in tune to the letter of it that they forget the spirit of what an IEP is. And I think that's, a lot of people experience that. Fortunately, my child, Colby, was able, as he got older, to share things with me to where I understood, but that wasn't always the case. And it's not the case for a lot of families, and you send the most important and precious thing in your life to someone else for 8 hours. And you pray and you hope that they have your child's best interest at heart. And they're not just, ticking a box. And what my favorite teacher, I said, Colby, he's different. He's a sweet kid. He's a smart kid. He's a loving kid. He's very kind. And I said, I know you've got 25 other kids or however many were in the class. And she goes, "You know what? But he's one. He's one of my 25. And I was just like, "I love you. I love you." It just, and I think we take for granted that every teacher has that mentality.
But I see more and more. Every person who goes into this walk of life certainly should, at the very, very least. Like in some societies, and I've mentioned this in my speeches, they refer to educators as generation builders, and that, yes, given that story you just gave, like that's why. Mm-hmm. So with this in mind, knowing all the challenges that educators face, based on your observation, what are some of the biggest challenges you've come across when it comes to implementing assistive tech within educational settings?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think there's much more awareness now about assistive technology and about the power of technology, and it's just kind of embedded into school. I remember when I was in college, if I did something on the computer, I mean, computer was a foreign language. It could count as a foreign language when I was in school. And if you did something on a typewriter in undergrad, that was considered, you got extra credit if you just used a typewriter. So, as my boys like to say, well, you were born in the 1900s. That's not a surprise.
Yep. The prehistoric era, the 1900s.
The challenges that I see, people will say it's the cost of the technology, but that by the law, that can't be a reason that schools don't have. That can't be a reason that a technology isn't provided for a child. But but sometimes that can certainly be an impeding factor to where they may not get the device that they really need, but they get one that has comparable abilities, I guess, and features. Another big thing is just professional development, and knowing that you need to train the student as well as the teacher, as well as the parent and the family. Like everyone needs to know how to use that device, what the purpose of that device is, and how, build that into just naturally occurring events within the child's day. Ongoing support, like doing check-ins to make sure, okay, is this really doing what it is that the technology was meant to do? Is it really supporting that child? As kids get older, like with my son, he didn't want to stand out from his friends. And so he didn't want to carry this device around. And he didn't want to use a computer when nobody else was able to use a computer. And so I'll never forget when he was in second grade was when he first got like his first computer, like a laptop they were going to try a laptop with him. And one of the kids said, well, that's not fair. Colby gets to use a computer. And he said, it's not fair that my brain doesn't work the same way as everybody else's.
Wow.
Wow. That was powerful for him to say.
Wow.
And he could say that in second grade. When he became, sixth, seventh, eighth, he was homeschooled some, and he was on homebound for medical reasons some in middle school. But when he went to high school, like he pretty much abandoned the technology by choice. Like it was still in his IEP, and the teachers would try to use it with him, and he did not want to do it. As he got into high school, the only accommodation he wanted was, there was one class that he really wanted to do well in. He really liked the teacher, and he would go and take tests in a separate time. Like I would either bring him early to school or he would stay after school. He didn't want to leave the class to go and do it. And that teacher, I mean, he was so kind, because he could tell that Colby, or she could tell that Colby was really struggling to try to complete the test in class. And so she said, you know what, I'm going to give you a test. It's not going to be the same test, but I'm going to give you a test. You take it in class. That way you're taking it right along with your peers, and they'll never know that it's not the same test. Then you come after school and I'll give you the real test. And I mean, she recognized the importance of that friend group and not wanting to look different than other people in the class. And that was huge, because, that's one of the main reasons for technology abandonment is either the technology breaks and it takes a long time for it to get fixed, or the person will abandon because it doesn't fit
Social pressures.
Yeah. And fortunately, a lot of technology now, like one of my favorite things is the LiveScribe pen, and like are you familiar with that one?
No, I don't know what the LiveScribe pen is.
Yeah, it may be called Echo now, but I mean, you could get them at Target. They were like $99, but it has it's a notebook, and the pen now it's a little bit smaller. It used to be bigger, but you would take notes. And well, with Colby, his thing was, I can either take notes or I can listen. I can't do both. And if I take notes, I'm not going to be able to read it later. So I'm just really going to try to listen. So he would just put like 1, 2, 3, or whatever points. You just write it on the paper. Then, so you hit a record button and then you write it. So then later on, you go back to hit play, and you put the pen down wherever it is on that page that you want to hear, and it goes to that exact moment in time. And so you can it's so fine-tuned now that you can actually, his instructor would kind of walk around the room, and you could hear like the different levels with, you could tell that he was moving in the room and all of that. So it worked amazingly well for him, especially in math, because he could just write down the math problems. Yeah. And then when she would start it, he would just put the pin on that one. When he'd go to the next one, he'd put the pin on that one. So if he knew how to do 1 through 5, he'd just put it on number 6, versus the old time where you just had to kind of keep fast forwarding, to get to the part that you needed. So that one, I wish he would use that in college, because it's pretty Like it doesn't really stand out to me. But to him, he knows what it does, and so he doesn't want to, he doesn't want to use it.
We've talked about assistive tech. How do you think AI can help further level the playing field, or do you think it's a hindrance, a mix of both? Like most things in life, there's a good and bad. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a good and bad. There's a good and bad in it, and I think we as educators are still trying to figure out and navigate that. I mean, I think we need to embrace it because it's here, and our students are using it. Whether I'm talking about my college student, my traditional college students. I mean, they're using it whether we want them to or not. So we need to kind of embrace it. And what does that really need to look like? Um, Other ways that it can be used for kids that learn differently. I mean, the text to speech, the software, the real time translation, helping with outlines of papers and kind of some quick down and dirty resources are available now, free for the most people. It can be free, but they need to be trained on how to use it effectively. And then that comes along with teaching the educator or the parent, hey, that's not cheating. That we're using this technology in the good way, in the right way. We're not using it in a way, that students just put a prompt in. Like, and it was funny. The first time I ever noticed someone using AI in one of my classes to cheat, the assignment was how technology is changing and evolving, and how what supports are there for plagiarism, and like how do you avoid it. And the person used AI on that assignment. I was like, of all assignments, you're kidding me.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's
Yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah. So that, there's and it's growing and changing, and so I think that's something is really on the cutting edge. In fact, that was the keynote for Acres last year, was AI, because there was everybody wants to know, okay, how can we make this into something good for students?
So AI, assistive tech, we mentioned funding. We literally mentioned in this conversation the structural safety of buildings in the rural community and
Mhm.
people trying to just learn, which should be a fundamental right, but perhaps that's asking for too much sometimes. Uh, yeah, one would think. So if pretend, and I've asked other educators and aspiring educators this question, so pretend money is now no object.
Mm.
All of your educational, professional experience, all of it accumulates, and you have this grand plan with money being no object. You're molding this next generation of educators. What, with all this in mind, how would you fund this assistive tech space with inclusive design in mind, with universal design in mind?
That would just be a dream, wouldn't it? I mean, first,
Yeah,
that money would go to increase the teachers' pay.
yeah.
But I mean, that hands down needs to happen. Um, then looking at environments, one, and then you can embed like the UDL and the trauma informed practice, like you can embed that into a learning environment where there are safe spaces for everybody. So there's safe spaces, there's quiet spaces, there's multiple ways that kids can learn and engage with the material within that classroom. And so I really, I hate going into classrooms and I just see rows of desks. I mean, that's we don't typically learn that way, and it's more um, crowd control in some ways. I mean, because it is easier to teach to lines of desks than to have people moving about and interacting with things in different ways and interacting with different groups. And I mean, but I would love, especially in the K6 environment, to see a setting where, let's say, like we did a study one time looking at UDL and teaching about the solar system. And so we had a station where they watched now I can't, it's not the science guy, but it was another brain pop video. So they could watch the brain pop video.
Mhm.
And then we recorded a lesson so they could watch it on the computer. And then we had a teacher that just kind of, that sat around with groups, and they could rotate. And she talked about it, and she had, a PowerPoint and visuals and stuff, and they could rotate between the three, and they could access them as they wanted. They could go to all three of them. They could go to two of them. Um, and then there were different stations where they could demonstrate what it is that they knew. There was the paper and pencil test. There was an iPad where they just talked into it and said what they knew about. I think it was how the seasons changed or something. I had to look it up to figure out the answer, but how like what causes the seasons change or something like that. And then there was a place where kids could draw pictures, and then there was a way that they could do models. And so in young grades, I mean, certainly that's not going to, kids still need to learn to write papers. They still need to learn how to spell. They still need to do all of those things. But at the base of what we want them to learn, the beginning, you learn to read, then you read to learn, right? And so how can we supplement environments for kids that have not learned to read yet, or that are still learning to read, or that, struggle at different parts and need things at lower levels? How can we address all of those? And technology can do that. And so I think having from the beginning, you have different environments and different places within those classrooms where kids can access what it is that they need. It's going to take some work in the beginning so that kids can understand what it is that they need, but then having it all available. And I, I love it when I go into classrooms and there's devices that are available, and if anybody wants to use it, they can use it. Versus you can't, that's Lola's device. Nobody can use it. I mean, that's Lola's. Now, we certainly want it to be available to you when you need it, but if you, that's another way to isolate somebody. And people, I see them do it, and I know they're very well intentioned. They don't mean it to be, need it to be negative or stigmatizing, but it can be, because you're considered something separate. And so if you create those environments in the very beginning, thinking about all the different ways that kids learn and all the different ways that kids can show you what they know, and just have that accessible and whatever accessibility needs. Because if a child, I remember when I was when I was a classroom teacher, and again, I'm digressing. I'll tell Colby I digressed on my own. we had a little boy, and he could only crawl or like scoot around on his bottom. And so some of the other kids were acting, I'll just say Casey, that's his name was not Casey. And so one of the parents was upset, was like, well, I mean, now, my child's only going to want to, like scoot on the floor. And I said, okay, just let's watch this. So I was like, okay, guys, let's get your coats. We're going outside. You know what? Her child jumped up, got her coat, and I said, when it becomes functional for like they'll do what they are able to do when they want to be able to do it. And so same thing like with sign language and technology. Like if they learn sign language and they learn have speech, they'll never learn to talk. And that's not true.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure
The
off
research is
sometimes of
not
having
there
to
at
do.
all.
It's not. The research isn't there, and it's almost the opposite is true in that it creates a way that takes the pressure off them being able to form words and to be able to be it, because they've got these backups. So let me try this and see if it works. And so a lot of times that actually increases kids' spontaneous language, and you can work then on some more articulation and some more of the pragmatics of language when they're actually willing to try to use words versus simply rely on pointing to a picture. And not that that's not also important. They're all important. And it just depends where kids are in their journey.
What lessons do you hope your students learn? And, seeing, they're getting this, they're really the first generation that will be exposed to both AI and assistive tech together as they go out and start their careers. So, what lessons do you hope they learn from the past based on some of your teaching, the history of how we got to where we are now as a society when it comes to special education? And what do you hope, what hope do you have for them as they navigate the future uncertainty? Because there's a lot of
Yeah,
uncertainty.
yeah, yeah. I am comforted a lot by the this generation of students right now, that I see at the college level, and I'm sure it's just going to continue. But they're very community oriented and very civic minded. I mean, I love that about them. Um, I think to learn from the past, they've I really want to impart for students to just understand that the historical inequities in education, and
Yeah.
then just strive to create that inclusive classroom, where all students, regardless of what their backgrounds are, their abilities are, that they're given an equal access to succeed, and not just in like the content, but also socially and in other aspects that are such an important aspect of education. Um, I hope that my students learn the power of adaptability and
Ooh,
recognize that change is happening all the time in education, and that we've got to be adaptable and flexible to be successful as teachers, because there's going to be new challenges, and there's going to be societal shifts and societal shifting needs and change, and there's going to be technology advancements, um, and all of that needs to go around the fact that they know that their teaching is going to be student centered, and just to embrace that concept that you're not the sage on the stage. That's not what a good educator is. Um, when I was in college, that's all it was. Like, a teacher stood up at the
yep.
podium and you listened and you took notes, and you did not really speak. You just took rigorous notes for 50 minutes or however long the class was. But that's not the way that kids today learn. So we just need to embrace that, and that we need to prepare instruction that is student centered and that focuses on their interests and their abilities, rather than that whole one size fits all. Um, I want them to be um, reflective and realize that there's continuous improvement, that you don't ever become like the perfect teacher. You don't ever become the perfect anything. There's always a way that you can grow, but you have to be honest in your self reflections. You can't be thin skinned and go into education. I mean, you can't.
Mm,
Um, and great educators, they're always growing and they're always learning. And you seek to improve your practice. I mean, you've got to have that desire within you. Um, and then also that historical and cultural awareness is keenly important in educators, just realizing that the impact from the past and that cultural context in education that we have today. And they can help people address biases, and then you can become a better teacher, better person as well. Um, and you've got to learn and be comfortable with everybody not liking you, because you've got to advocate for the marginalized populations of students that you have, no matter what that marginalization is, whether it's disability, culture, sexual preference, or orientation. I mean, you've got to be able to advocate for every single person just as uniquely strong and with the authentic voice that you do for each and every child. That it has to be the same, whether it's something you agree with or not. That's not you're not called to teach people you agree with, or that you like their standards, or that you like their mom, or you like their dad. I mean, it's you teach every single student. You own every single student's success in your classroom. Um, I think my hope for the future would definitely be to embrace technology and be innovative, and not use technology simply for technology's sake, but know that it makes a powerful difference for students and help kids be able to engage and to access curriculum. You look at a lot of classrooms and a lot of schools in our country today, and the buildings are more accessible than the technology, than the classrooms and the learning materials. I
mm,
mean, that's crazy to think, but it's true. And so if you personalize that instruction is really important. Um, and you've got to be a resilient and empathetic person to be in education. Now, mindfully taking care of your own focus on your own mental health and your own well-being. We understand the influence of compassion fatigue in education. It's very real. But you've got to cultivate that resilience and empathy, to enabling students to feel that through their challenges and uncertainties, but know that there's always that safe space to land, and you want to be that safe space. You want to be that place, in that understanding environment and that strong teacher. And I mean, that's one of my favorite things that I bought it for myself for Mother's Day, but I had the kids wrap it, so I guess it did come from them. But picture of all of us, and we were just like wrapped around each other. Like the three of us were just one, and it just said, "Our soft place to land." And I mean, it was my favorite. And granted, I gave it to myself, but like I said, they wrapped it. But I mean, you want to be that teacher. You want to be that educator. You want to be that administrator. That knows that classroom is their safe space.
Soft place to land. Wow. For those who would like to know more about the American Council of Rural Special Education, or ACRES, how could they learn more about ACRES?
So you can always contact me, and I'm fine if you want to put my email address,
Okay.
And I'll send you my Gmail address as well. Okay. Do you need me to say it out loud? I don't know how these podcasts.
It's okay. You can say it out loud. I'll also put in the show notes.
Okay. So sometimes the university will put things to spam, and so people think I'm ignoring them, and I'm really not. So I'll give you all three. I've got my Gmail, and then there's an ACRES ACRES email address, and then my own personal email address. So depending on which person that you want to get to, the educator, the mom, that person, or do you want the organizational information? But you can also just Google American Council on Rural Special Education, or ACRES, ACRES spelled out, and then put WVU, and it'll take you to our website.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Oh, it's always fun to be with you. It's just a blessing. And I hope Tuesday goes well for you. Start of school.
Thank you. Yes. Start the first day of school over here. First day of school.
Yeah.
As always, thank you for listening to the Not Your Mama's Autism podcast on the Live Podcast Network. If you like what you hear, please share and subscribe. If you're interested in how this podcast came to be, please check out season 1 of this podcast in its entirety. If you would like to follow us on social media, check us out on Instagram or Facebook at Not Your Mama's Autism. If you're interested in booking me for a speaking engagement for your organization or at your next event, please check out loladadaollie.com. See you soon.
Not Your Mama's Autism podcast is written and produced by my mom, Lola Dada Ollie, and is occasionally produced by me, Bella Ollie. My dad and sister also contribute sometimes. Big thanks to Annalie Ackerman for her audio and video editing support. Until next time, everyone, see you soon.